You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 Gov.biz Radio, a CBS station.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. You're listening to us on CBS radio station Gov.biz, 1580 AM in the Washington, D.C. area, or on the web, WMClive.com. And that's where you can also find links to podcasts of all our previous shows. And we want to hear from you, too. So tweet us at hashtag WMCLive or email us at womensmediacenterlive@gmail.com. Now, this week we're plunging into the new year by taking on and trying to demystify merely the world economic crisis. Austerity measures, fiscal cliffs, debt ceilings, inflation, stagflation, which sounds to me like a process for injecting deer with helium. Stagflation. Anyway, we want to know how it all shakes down on the majority of people alive, who happen to be female people. The U.S. Ambassador to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, Karen Kornbluh, is with us to talk about government policy. Then Professor of Economics and Gender Studies, Susan Feiner, talks and dates the contemporary economic situation to the Pleistocene era. And we close on a double-segment conversation with the great Vandana Shiva, the internationally admired environmentalist and feminist economist, who also, from New Delhi, shares some startling insights into the mass demonstrations that are shaking India in the wake of the horrific gang rape that caused the death of a young woman. How is that connected to economics? It is, you know. Stay tuned and see. But first, it's important to go behind the headlines. Gerda Lerner died on January 2 at age 92 after a rich and fulfilling, yet painful life. The mother, in effect, of women's history studies, she risked her own academic credentials in that pioneering crusade. So-called serious historians laughed at the idea that women had ever done anything to warrant study. That she was a major 20th century intellect is a given. That she unearthed women's buried past, validating the global feminist present, and helping to make possible a sane future for women and men alike, all this you can find in the obituaries. Do read or reread her books, all of them, but especially Black Women in White America, a documentary, The Creation of Patriarchy, and The Creation of Feminist Consciousness. Plus, a small jewel often overlooked, a jewel of a book called A Death of One's Own, about the ethical, emotional, and even political complexities of her husband Carl's slow and difficult dying. And think about her in March, since the idea for Women's History Week, which evolved into Women's History Month, was inspired by her classes. But that she was my friend, albeit not one of daily intimacy, means that I wish to pay her the tribute of speaking less about her than honoring her own words. In today's Verbal Karate section, later on in the program, I'll share some of her extraordinary insights on language. Meanwhile, here are some samples of Gerda's life work on women's history, which, after all, is human history. Let her speak for herself. Patriarchy is a system of dominance based on the invention of arbitrary differences among people to create and maintain power. The differences can be based on race, class, sex, physical makeup, or any other arbitrary distinction, body image, sexual preference. It is not difference that is the problem. It is dominance justified by appeals to constructed differences that is the problem. Everything that explains the world has explained a world that does not exist, in which men are at the center of the human enterprise and women are at the margin, helping them. Women have made history as much as men have, not contributed to it. Only they did not know what they had made, and they had no tools to interpret their own experience. The appeal of the new right is simply that it seems to promise nothing will change in the domestic realm. People are terrified of change there, because it's the last humanizing force left in society, and they think, correctly, that it must be retained. The shift in consciousness we must make occurs in 2 steps. We must, at least for a while, be woman-centered. We must, as far as possible, leave patriarchal thought behind. Perhaps the greatest challenge to thinking women is the challenge to move from the desire for safety and approval to the most unfeminine quality of all, that of intellectual arrogance, the supreme hubris which asserts to itself the right to reorder the world. The planet is smaller to me somehow, without her on it. Well, our first guest, Karen Kornbluh, has been a senior advisor to Barack Obama since he was first elected to the U.S. Senate. As Deputy Chief of Staff to Secretary of the Treasury Robert Rubin under President Clinton, she had focused on e-commerce and international trade, then founded the Work and Family Program at the New America Foundation. She was recently the Obama administration's ambassador to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. Welcome, Karen, to Women's Media Center Live, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Robin.
Now, you are just back, I gather, from being the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and it launched its gender initiative, I imagine in no small part to your nudging. Would you explain, many people don't know what the OECD is and does. Would you, A, explain what it is and does, and 2, talk a little bit about the gender initiative and how that will help us back home?
Oh, I'd love to. Thanks for asking. I always say that the OECD is one of the most important international organizations that you've never heard of. It was started as part of the Marshall Plan to try to get European countries after World War II to cooperate economically and prevent another war. The U.S. obviously was a big supporter of it, and then so it started out as the Organization for European Economic Cooperation, and then the U.S. joined, Japan, Canada, became the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's now 34 members, including Mexico, Korea, Israel joined recently, a number of countries from Southeastern Europe. And the idea is really to develop the standards, the rules for how to play fair in the international economic marketplace among the developed countries. And the big challenge that the OECD has right now is that it doesn't have these newly emerged economic powers, China, Russia, Brazil, Indonesia, and India as members. And so it's constantly working to try to get those countries to start to follow some of the standards that were developed for the developed countries to play fair. So what we wanted to do was say, okay, let's take this old line economic organization that's about economic growth and say, okay, women's issues are key to economic growth, and especially in this crisis.
Absolutely.
So the U.S., me working with Hillary Clinton, Milan Verveer at the State Department, who's the global ambassador for women, we came to them and said, don't you think this should be part of your mandate?
And what was the reaction?
Well, I think they were very receptive but cautious at first. A number of the other ambassadors said, isn't this something the World Bank worries about? Is this really an economic issue? And so we had to convince them that women's issues are economic issues, and also economic issues are women's issues, that you're not going to get growth if you don't have everybody participating.
That's right.
And we were helped a lot by a few key countries. So in South Korea, they really understand that because it's hard for a mother to continue working, they have a development challenge because most women are reluctant to have children sometimes, and then also they drop out of the workforce when they do have children. So they see this as a development challenge. Similarly in Japan. In Iceland, they came at it from a different direction. My colleague from Iceland said, we think that Iceland wouldn't have had the economic crisis it did if more women had been in a position of power. And so my colleague, who was the Icelandic ambassador of MAN, said, sign me up. I want to help in whatever way I can. I've been told by my ministry to champion all gender initiatives because we think this is key to a sane, healthy economic growth.
Now, if only the consciousness that women are central to the economy and that, in fact, all issues are women's issues would come home. If we could bring that home, that would be really nice. I mean, it seems so academic to me. Equal pay for equal work alone, this, would cut the poverty rate of two-income couples by 25% and cut the poverty rate for single mothers by half and put $200 billion more a year into the economy. Yet people still here in Congress discuss the economy as something separate from equal pay for women. It makes me completely crazy. So
I love the way you just said it because I think the way you just said it is so appealing to men as well as women. If you say it's going to bring in money to the whole family, this is important.
It's true.
Not just to a woman for a woman's rights issue, but it's also important, for the man so he doesn't have to work 5 jobs and never see his kids. And it's important to the children.
You can't have a healthy economy without women having a healthy economy, and you can't have development without women. It's just, hello, it's half the species. So tell me, you've spent most of your career fighting for economic equality, and we know that all issues are women's issues. How do we get that applied in this country to, for example, family policy? You've done so much there. I mean, we're the only modern democracy without a national system of child care. How do we catch up, Karen, to other countries on some of the social safety net?
Well, I want us to take credit for one thing that has happened that's fantastic, and that's healthcare reform. When I was writing about this issue some 10 years ago, the number one thing I said we should do for women and families is have universal health care.
Hallelujah.
Because women tend to be in more contingent jobs and part-time jobs or lower-paid jobs where they don't get health care. Or if an employer is providing health care, they may say to people, you can't work a flexible schedule because I'm paying all this money for your health care. So if we have health care, we've really helped families and the employment situation.
Right.
And thank goodness that's been passed. That's been upheld. So I think we should all
exhale.
Really just see that as a huge accomplishment and then work to make sure that it's implemented well. But then, as you said, another big issue is child care, and the administration did a lot in terms of early childhood in its stimulus package. But I think there's more to be done in terms of keeping that going and making sure there's quality child care. Absolutely. And then on pay equity, thank goodness the Lilly Ledbetter Act was the first thing that the president signed, and that he's still talking about it. I loved that part of the election conversation where the president said, I remember my mother being passed over for promotion.
Yep.
This is a hugely important issue. The First Lady talked about this issue. Even Mitt Romney and his wife talked a little bit about pay equity. And so I think it's now on the national agenda, and I think it's up to all of us to keep talking about it in the way you just talked about it, as a mainstream economic issue.
Right, everybody's self-interest. We've only got about another 40 seconds left. This isn't making me completely crazy because there's so much more I wanted to ask you. But just
sorry, I was talking too much.
In 10 seconds, there's some maternity leave, paid sick days, family leave. Is any of that, you think, on the docket for the second term?
Well, the president has supported working with the states on to do more on family and medical leave. Mm-hmm. And I think there's some really exciting work that's going on in the states already on this, and it's really important to support that work. There's some movement that's going on the Hill as well. The anniversary of the Family and Medical Leave Act is coming up, and I think we'll be hearing a lot about the huge success of that act and how important it's been to so many people. But also how we need to do more because it only applies to half of workers and it's not paid.
Right.
And then, of course, there's sick leave as well.
Right.
And there's legislation on sick leave because right now American workers don't have a right to take a paid sick day. They don't have a right to take a day off if their children are sick. They can be fired. So that's another important agenda item that a lot of people on the Hill and outside are working on.
All right. May we come back to you for your wisdom at some later point when we have more time?
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Robin.
It's time for us to take a short break here. This is Women's Media Center Live, talk radio with a brain. I'm Robin Morgan. Think about giving us a tweet or two, hashtag WMC Live, like what's on your women's rights wish list for 2013. In a few minutes, Verbal Karate is coming up. Also, did you know that reducing the deficit might be a good thing for women? Stay tuned and find out why. After Hurricane Sandy, parts of the East Coast have returned to normal, but others won't see normal again for quite some time. One group getting volunteers and aid supplies to those who need it is called Occupy Sandy. Made up of a coalition of Occupy Wall Street activists, community organizers, and technologists, Occupy Sandy is using social media and other software tools to identify and quickly respond to urgent needs among the hardest-hit communities. You can help. To donate or to volunteer, visit occupysandy.org.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 gov.biz radio, a CBS station.
Welcome back. Our next guest, Susan Feiner, is a professor of economics and gender studies at the University of Southern Maine. She writes frequently and provocatively for the features section of womensmediacenter.com and also for Women's E-News and for the Ms. Magazine blog. Welcome, Susan, to Women's Media Center Live. It's good to have you here.
Robin.
I want to start with a number of blogs and articles that you've written about the deficit and why we shouldn't fall over sideways in horror at the deficit, because it might not be that bad for women in that it comes out of an economics field that is back with the dinosaurs. Talk about that. It's fascinating.
Sure. The economics profession is pretty much guilty of malpractice. And the best analogy that's quite accessible to most folks is as if our professors of astronomy were teaching students that the sun and the planets go around the Earth, the Ptolemaic paradigm. And in economics, the economics that is being taught in our colleges and universities, and increasingly in our high schools, which is even worse, is based on a completely wrong-headed vision of how the economy works.
Susan, is that because it's based on valuing, on erasing women's existence and women's work, and valuing sort of death things?
It's a huge error, and it's part of the partiality of the vision of economists. But I wouldn't say that that's the only thing that's causing economics to be wrong. I mean, mainstream economics also refuses to recognize the value of clean air, the value of clean water, the value of safety at work, the value of being able to send your kids to school, sure that gunmen aren't going to come in and shoot everybody.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things that mainstream economics refuses to value. There's a wonderful little video by Marilyn Waring, who was one of the first economists to point this out. It's called
I know.
Sex, Lies, and Global Economics.
Mm-hmm.
And people might want to take a look at that. It's quite a fun introduction to the systematic erasure of women's contributions to the economy. So that is part of the partiality of economics, but it's not the entire reason. Keynes, who wrote in the 30s, had a much greater appreciation for the economy as an organic, very complicated, often working at cross purposes, dynamic set of systems. Mm-hmm. And the economics that's taught is a much more mechanistic, kind of like the Newtonian clockwork universe, that sort of mechanistic vision married to a defense of private property and profit at all costs. Those are really fundamental, and each of those two pieces in its own way works against the interests of women, the interests of people who are not wealth holders, the interests of people who live outside of market-based systems, and there's probably a couple of other pieces that are more arcane.
You've written that the analogy that they always make of, well, with a household budget, when your credit card is maxed out, you have to pay your debts. And, that's the same with the government, that it's a completely false analogy.
This is really a very, very important point that the current dialogue completely and utterly confuses. The federal government is not like a household for quite a number of reasons, not least of which is that it's not going to go out of business or die. What's going on is there's these huge numbers, $16 trillion deficits. People are not putting the numbers in perspective. There's so many things that are crazy about this debate. But first of all, the deficit is around 10% of GDP, so like $1.6 trillion. Mm-hmm. We have a $16 trillion economy. So imagine instead of 16 trillion, that your income was $160,000 a year.
Okay.
If you had an income of $160,000 a year, and your debt was $16,000, you wouldn't think anything of it.
No, you wouldn't.
You totally wouldn't.
Yeah.
In fact, if you went and got a mortgage for a house that was $300,000, which is 2 and something times the size of it's about twice your income, you wouldn't think anything about that either.
And nobody else would either.
And nobody else would. The bank would be delighted to loan you that amount of money.
So how can they pull off the scam?
Because if we cut deficits, we are going to squash the standard of living of the majority of American people. And I think at this point in time, the owners of capital in the world recognize that their future is not in nations, but it is transnational.
Yeah, of course.
And so it doesn't matter to them if Americans become very poor and can't buy the junk they produce.
Because somebody else will.
People somewhere else who can buy the junk they produce.
Well, sooner or later, the way they're treating the planet, there won't be people anywhere, and there won't be a planet,
That's unfortunately true.
I always think when they're so worried about when they say, we can't run up this debt for our children and our grandchildren, that's their mantra. And I talk back to my television set saying, well, what about your children and your grandchildren who won't have air to breathe because you're denying global climate change?
Well, it's even more pathetic than that. The children and grandchildren will, if we don't run up this deficit, which I think is a good thing. Running it up is a good thing. Yeah. If we don't spend money on schools and education and on roads and on clean air and clean water, then the debt that our children and our grandchildren will face will be a nation with no roads and no mass transit and a completely declined infrastructure and schools that you're embarrassed to send your children to.
Oh, it's Mad Max.
It's not like we're not getting anything for this deficit.
I know.
Way too much of our deficit is in military spending. With half of our military budget, we still have as much military budget as the whole rest of the world, plus twice as much as Russia spends, plus twice as much as China spends. That would free up $500 billion a year.
Wow. Which is
more than enough to give every state in the union the funds they need to go back to 2007 levels of state spending.
Wow.
Which is where the bulk of the spending is that supports human needs.
God. On that note, to my horror, we've got to close because we've run out of time. But I could talk to you for hours. Thank you so much, Susan, for being with us. You are terrific.
Thank you very much for having me, Robin. I really appreciate it.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye now. And now it's time for Verbal Karate. This week, there's a different approach in the intellectual dojo. This week, the chops will be all from one woman, the late Gerda Lerner, who eloquently used language, not even her own mother tongue, to create an entire field of academic study and immeasurable political impact. Her observations about language had much to do with her observations about history. So here is Gerda Lerner on not having a language of her own. I have a German name which is unpronounceable by English speakers and thus is inevitably mispronounced. I accepted that mispronunciation as the proper form of address for me, came to use it myself, and have done so for 50 years. I became aware of the disjunction only when I spent some time in German-speaking countries and heard my name pronounced correctly. Each time that happened, it gave me pleasure. That made me realize that it pained me that my own children, my husband, my best friends could never really pronounce my name. I had buried that pain and refused to acknowledge it. It was, so I thought, a trivial matter. I no longer think so. The Nazis robbed me of my mother tongue, but the violent severing of culture was my choice. My intense drive to become an American writer had pushed me into leaving the language of my childhood behind, never counting the cost. One covered up loss and built anew. Now, memory includes what was lost and what it cost, and what might have been had I been able to write in my own language, healing the split between intellect and emotion, between the conscious learned faculties and the rich vibrations of the unconscious. I might have found a richer, more poetic form for what I had to say. In translation, one becomes a trickster, too concerned with mastery. I envy those who live in the power of their own language, not deprived of the immediacy by which creativity finds its form. So the woman who had been forced to silence her past set herself to articulate ours, and Gerda Lerner, whose name could not be pronounced, unearthed our names and taught us how to pronounce ourselves. If that's not verbal karate, I don't know what is. It's break time again. This is Women's Media Center Live, and I'm Robin Morgan. We will return in just a minute with the woman whom the Guardian newspaper called one of the world's most prominent radical scientists, Dr. Vandana Shiva. "40 years ago this January, the Supreme Court decision Roe v. Wade guaranteed women's right to choose abortion. In 1977, Congress ended this right for the most vulnerable women when it passed the Hyde Amendment, banning Medicaid coverage of abortion. The National Network of Abortion Funds works to restore coverage while helping women pay for the procedures they need. You can help too. To learn more or donate so no woman is forced to carry an unwanted pregnancy to term, go to fundabortionnow.org.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 gov.biz radio, a CBS station.
And we're back from the break with a guest quite dear to me, an old friend on the phone all the way from New Delhi. Vandana Shiva is a world-renowned environmental thinker and activist and a former physicist. She's the author of numerous books, including her classic Staying Alive, as well as Water Wars and Ecofeminism and others. She's the winner of the 2010 Sydney Peace Prize and, in 1993, the alternative Nobel Peace Prize, the Right Livelihood Award. Welcome, Vandana. Welcome all the way from New Delhi to Women's Media Center Live.
It's a joy to be talking to you again, Robin.
It's a joy to talk to you. It's been far, far, far too long. Dinosaurs walked the earth when last we talked. It's been way too long. I want to start right in, and although we're focusing on economics, as you and I know, everything is connected to everything else, certainly in a feminist analysis. And you recently wrote a stunning piece, which I first encountered on the SpinFXPress.com website, about the ghastly gang rape in New Delhi and the subsequent demonstrations, and how violence against women and the economy were all connected. And I'd love you, please, to talk about the 4 points that you raised in that piece.
Yeah, I wrote the piece because the feminist movement, knowing I've been working on how the economy is changing, globalization, free trade, WTO, the structural adjustment, I'd made the connections between those processes and what happens to women. But time has passed, and they wanted, once again, to bring in these elements. There are 4 ways in which what is called the new economy, they even call us the emerging economy, as if a 10,000-year-old civilization emerges only when it's locked into a corporate globalization.
Yes, where have you been all this time? Hello?
Hello?
Yes, are you there?
Is it working?
Yes, it's working. Go on.
Yeah. So the first level where the violence against women begins is the very defining of the economy. Economy means household. It is what women use to define both inside the physical households, but also the world, the planet as the household. And as long as the principles of management came out of that, they focused on sustenance, livelihoods, mutual giving, of course within the typical patriarchies all our societies have had. The first thing, new economic policies grow under the garb of neoliberal policies, free trade, globalization. The first thing they do is knock out that major sector of women's economy. And as Marilyn Waring has written in her book, If Women Counted, a production boundary is installed to be able to calculate growth. The gross domestic product grows every time you can pull something out of nature and something out of women's sustenance economies, which means every time you destroy nature and you destroy women's economies and livelihoods and production and creativity, you can call it growth. It is created to mobilize finances for the war. It's become the dominant number imposed on our world. And I've been appointed by the King of Bhutan to an expert group they've created because Bhutan, as you know, said gross domestic product is a wrong measure. We should be looking at the well-being of our people, at the happiness of our people. Mm-hmm. And so they measure gross national happiness. At this time, where that growth-oriented myopic obsession is already collapsing worldwide. It collapsed with Wall Street. It's collapsing in Europe right now in front of our eyes. And it will collapse in India. After a few years, how long can you sustain a 9 and 8% growth? That exclusion of women as the primary backbone of the economy is the first violence. The second violence is the violence in terms of decision-making and political power. So many debates in India are, we can't have politics in economics. But every time they make a patriarchal decision within a patriarchal model of the economy, it is politics. It's capitalist politics, it's patriarchal politics, it's politics that basically says only corporations count, only the powerful count, and we're going to mutate democracy from being by the people, of the people, for the people, into being by the corporations, for the corporations, of the corporation, and of the powerful. And the merger and convergence of economic power and political power further excludes women, but it also creates a class with immunity and impunity, which can do all levels of violence, change laws, remove protections, no labor rights, no environmental protection. Mm-hmm. And as I've written in that article, there's rape at every level, rape of the earth, rape of our resources, rape of the economy, rape of the household, and rape of women. which is what this drastic, dramatic tragedy has woken up India to. Then there's other levels of violence because all those displaced people are more vulnerable. I was asked by the National Commission of Women about 5 years ago to grapple with what was globalization doing to women in India. And they wanted me to look at two key sectors, what's happening with women and water, and what's happening with women, food, and agriculture. So we organized public hearings around the country because we believe these changes aren't being captured by academia. We wanted women to directly talk. And whether it was West Bengal in Calcutta or it was down south, women would talk about how sexual violence has increased and made them more vulnerable as they've been made economic and ecological refugees. The commodification that is at the very foundation of this neoliberal model, that everything is a commodity, everything is property, everything has a price and nothing has value, has added to the traditional patriarchies our societies are anyway burdened with, and created what I could at best call a super virus of patriarchy. You know, you have viruses, but when two viruses hybridize, they are like the SARS virus that start to kill.
Yes.
Earlier you just got a cold, now you die.
Yeah.
So basically, and it's a bit like climate change. We've had cyclones, but a Hurricane Katrina and a Hurricane Sandy is a different kind and level.
That's right.
Of violence. And of course we know that this is contributed by climate change. And I believe we need to start looking at how an economy based on patriarchal definitions, on increasing the power of patriarchal institutions, patriarchal fictions. The corporation is a fiction, but it's the biggest patriarch in our lives today. We need to start seeing how this patriarchy is combining with traditional patriarchies to unleash even larger violence, of course, of the kind we see on the streets of Delhi, but the violence of the economic kind, the violence of robbing you of your home, of your foundations. Our Prime Minister went and said during the recent time in a comment, it's these loose-footed migrants that are part of the problem.
Oh, my God.
Because the Delhi rape was migrants at both ends, the rapist and the victim. The rapists were all living in slums in hugely brutalized conditions, thinking that brutalization is the norm. The poor girl, her father had sold his land because farmers aren't being allowed to make a living. 270,000 Indian farmers have committed suicide. The rest are hanging on the margins of existence. So he moved to Delhi to become a loader at the airport. He was loading luggage to be able to survive and send his children to school and education. And the Prime Minister just called them loose-footed migrants creating problem. And in a comment, I said, Mr. Prime Minister, they are a product of your policies. They are refugees of your economic policies. And it's time to break the insulation between economics and democracy and politics. Economics and culture, economics and society.
Yes.
None of these are insulated silos. And the economy becoming the dominant force, the patriarchal model becoming the dominant force in our society. Societies have been reduced to economy. Economy has been reduced to the market. The market has been reduced to what is controlled by finance, capital, corporations. This has huge influence. It's all you show is women as commodities, selling other commodities. Those images start to shape the brains of already damaged brains.
Of course. Isn't it amazing, Vandana, how when you put something in context, it changes? I mean, what you're talking about, the background of the victim, and for that matter of the perpetrators. But also, when you're talking about commodification, it reminds me... Ruchira Gupta, your colleague in India who works with Apni App and rescuing trafficked women. And Ruchi wrote a piece about the crisis in Delhi, the rape and so forth, in which she pointed out that the commodification of women by the rampant growth of pornography and prostitution sends the message that, in fact, this is what women are for. and that she connects also the rise in rape statistics, apparently quite dramatic rise in rape statistics.
Huge dramatic.
In India.
800% from the 70s and more than 250% since India's economy was, as they say, made more open. It's been made more open to more violence against women.
My God. Well, we're going to have to take a break here soon, but when we come back, I want to talk about what do we do about this, because it seems from where I sit here in New York, heartening that women in numbers never seen before, and accompanied by men as well, have been on the streets in not only Delhi but across India, protesting the police indifference, the government corruption. They haven't quite in the mass numbers made the connections you're making, but they're on the move protesting violence against women, and that's been not the usual case. So when we come back, I want to go into that and into anything else you want to bestow your wisdom about.
Hardly wisdom, just by now a lot of experience, Robin.
That'll do. We'll just take a break for a minute here. Yes, a quick pause. I'm Robin Morgan here with Women's Media Center Live. We will return with more of Vandana Shiva on Making the Connections in just a minute.
If you ever need an organ transplant, you will probably die before you get one. Thousands of Americans die waiting every year. You can improve your odds by joining LifeSharers, and it's free. Visit lifesharers.org or call 888-ORGAN-88. LifeSharers puts organ donors first. When you join LifeSharers, you get preferred access to the organs of other members. This could literally save your life. Join LifeSharers today. There's no age limit. Parents can enroll their minor children, and no one is excluded due to any pre-existing medical condition. Call 888-ORGAN-88 or visit lifesharers.org. That's LifeSharers.org. LifeSharers. It's free. It could save your life.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 Gov.biz Radio, a CBS station.
And we're back. We're back talking with Dr. Vandana Shiva, author, activist, environmentalist, feminist, economist, and woman beyond labels. Let's pick up, Vandana, with what can be done about this. What can we do to turn the enormity of this around? Certainly women are on the move, but talk about the various ways in which you see dents being made in the system of commodification and violence to women, to the earth, and all those connections. It's always, for example, blown me away that a woman who is in the middle of giving birth, let's say in a hospital, she is, and she's in her 15th hour of labor, straining away, and the doctor is considered productive, and the nurses and the attendants and the anesthesiologists, they're all productive because they're all wage labor. But the woman who is actually giving birth is not considered in a productive act. So,
I think that is the foundational error.
Yeah.
That everything that replenishes, everything that rejuvenates, everything that reproduces is treated as not producing at all, and everything that degrades, everything that depletes is treated as production. And this patriarchal, I call it the creation boundary. If the production boundary has given us the fiction of growth and the GDP, the creation boundary has given us this fiction that destructive acts are creative acts that produce, and the really creative acts of nature in a tremendous diversity of women and their amazing ability to juggle 50 jobs, 30 responsibilities, whole society, whole economy are treated as unproductive. That, I think, is the most important shift we need to make. And, I come from, as you know, Robin, the part of the Himalaya where the Chipko movement started.
Yes.
And having grown up in that area where women are the main productive force, and it's recognized, they go out in the forests. There's nothing like rape. And you come into the plains. You come into the plains where this other economy has taken over, where women are no more considered productive, the violence starts. Now, when I was writing Staying Alive, I had witnessed something in Punjab, new boards announcing sex selection for female feticide.
Yeah.
And I went into a deeper study, and my sister, Dr. Meera Shiva, who's a physician and is on the government expert committees on the epidemic of female feticide, we realized that the map of high growth measured in the patriarchal measure are the same zones with the high levels of extermination of the girl child.
What do you know?
30 million girls haven't been allowed to be born in the last few decades. I think what's happened in Delhi is beautiful in the response for 3 reasons. The first, that the younger generation has come.
Aha.
I say the younger generation was absent from social movements, especially the middle class, because they were getting it so good with globalization. The IT jobs that moved to India,
Yes.
they were earning $2,000, which in India is a hell of a lot of money. They were all seeing themselves as individual consumers.
Mm-hmm.
They've risen in privilege very, very fast. So society did not matter to them. But this rape reminded them that it could have been them.
Brought it home.
It could have been them coming back from their IT firm, from their
Yes.
their phone call center, call centers, etc. The second difference, as you noted, Robin, is we've had the feminist movement in India.
Long
We've
time.
been walking the street, but it was the only women
Right.
at that time. And I think the beauty of it is young men joined. It was a young man who was defending this girl in that bus.
Yes.
So I think for the first time, there's this new gender solidarity that is emerging.
That's
and
a
I think
change.
The third thing that's emerging extremely clearly is very gutsy young people who realized with those, being beaten up and being sprayed with the tear gas.
Yes.
And water cannons at 5-6 degrees centigrade temperature, they realized that the state has become militarized.
Uh-huh.
The state itself is a patriarchal institution.
Of course.
And of course it's going to take time, and of course there'll be hysterical voices saying death sentence, death sentence, death sentence. But I think this has started to germinate new connections, and it's those connections that are really going to make the serious dents.
That's very encouraging, and when you look at the global scale of things, I confess, big secret, that I see it in women, because not only because we're the majority of the world's population, and that permits more peaceable and more how shall I say, witty and ingenious and new strategies than if you're a minority. But also because there's no area which isn't a women's issue. So we spill over into everything if the connections are made, which you are one of the main connectors. So I definitely see the global women's movement as the politics of the 21st century.
I think the thing to recognize is we are really living through a period of collapse of all kinds in the patriarchal system. The collapse of the financial economy they built, a collapse of the ecosystems they have raped.
Right.
I mean, the UN has recognized that 90% ecosystems are on the verge of collapse, if not already collapsed.
Right.
And in this period, of course, it's the creative principle, which women bring to bear for the simple reason that they were left to look after the real stuff of life, which is called not productive and not work, but really mattered. So they bring both another worldview, another mindset, another form of living, other capacities, other skills, which is why I run a grandmother's university at the new school called the Earth University that I created in Dehradun, where we run courses.
I love it.
Besides this burst of energy and a new relevance of women to finding solutions, is what I call womanly men.
Mm-hmm.
Gandhi always said a prayer, make me more womanly. And he said, if there's going to be a future for humanity, it will have to be a womanly future. And, you know, I go to Europe, and in Italy, young men will bring me my books and say, I'm an ecofeminist, Dr. Shiva. And that, to me, is a major, major shift. The shift from the illusion of a destructive economy as the economy to a creative economy where women start defining and playing a leadership role, but others recognize that there has to be a mind shift.
Whenever I talk to you, I feel both incredibly depressed because one is made yet again to realize the severity of the situation, and at the same time incredibly optimistic because I get from you a validation of everything that we've been trying to do, and we're going to do more and even better, with more people involved in the future. We're going to have to go. I can't tell you how grateful I am for your wisdom and your perceptions and for everything that you do all the time and keep on doing and have done for so long. And now that you're this great revered figure, I hope that more people are listening to you because you...
And Robin, I want to thank you for your vision and leadership and your love.
Oh, well, darling, it's very easy to love somebody like you and everything you stand for. Next time you come to New York, we have to have dinner and really catch up on our personal lives. Promise?
We have to.
And now it's time for Fighting Words. It's a new year, but I'm afraid we're back to so many sexists, so little time. How do I choose? There's the U.S. House of Representatives blocking the Violence Against Women Act's reauthorization because, heaven forfend, it might be extended to include same-sex partners and Native Americans. This bipartisan written law will be reintroduced in the new Congress, but it's going to have to start all over again. And meanwhile, state and local governments are going to have fewer resources to address domestic violence. Then there's Iran, which is always good for a snarl. The president fired his Minister of Health, the only woman to serve in the cabinet since the 1979 so-called revolution. Her sin? Publicly criticizing the government's response to the acute shortage of medicine imports, itself an indirect consequence of Western sanctions. The minister, Dr. Marzia Vahid Dasjeri, is a gynecologist who speaks out frequently on women's rights in Iran. And she said, I have heard that luxury cars have been imported with subsidized dollars, but I don't know what happened to the dollars that were supposed to be allocated for importing medicine. The government of Israel has a new reason to be embarrassed. That's on top of sex scandals, rape by high-ranking officials, accusations, corruption offenses, new settlements, and, oh yes, treatment of Israeli Arabs. Now they've gone and arrested devout Jewish women trying to pray while wearing ritual garments at the Western Wall of the Temple in Jerusalem. Following international expressions of outrage at the arrests, the government appointed a special panel to study gender division at the wall and to make recommendations in a few months. Meanwhile, sisters, back to your appointed corner and off with the tefillin. Then, of course, there's India. Masses in the streets after the brutal gang rape in Delhi that caused the victim's death, followed by a gang-raped teenager's suicide in Punjab when the police refused to arrest the rapist and instead pressured her to marry one of them. She couldn't see any way out and she drank poison. India does nothing in small numbers, so the thousands of feminist activists and women students who first marched protesting the epidemic of rape, plus police indifference and corruption, turned into nationwide demonstrations of hundreds of thousands. The protesters want Parliament to go into special session framing new violence against women laws, but the government is setting up, what do you think, committees to study the problem. Actually, there are encouraging aspects. As Vandana Shiva said, for one, many men are supporting the marchers in India, but also many men are supporting the would-be prayers in Jerusalem and the health minister in Iran and the violence against women reauthorization in Congress. Also, each of these stories did squeak through into mainstream news, continuing to be more behind the headlines than in them, but still. From the looks of it, women are starting 2013 royally pissed off and ready to move, and more men of conscience than ever before are following them. So it bodes to be a lively year indeed. And that's our show for this week. You've been listening to us on CBS station 1580 gov.biz AM radio in Washington, D.C., and on the web at WMClive.com. Remember to email us at womensmediacenterlive@gmail.com. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Views expressed here do not represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. WMC President and for this program Executive Producer Julie Burton, Senior Producer Crystal Williams-Chancellor, Technical Director Michelle Kinsey-Bruns, Production Assistant Nora Eakin, Board Operator Jimmy Henderson, and our founding sponsor Regina Kulik-Scully. Some listeners have been asking about the music used for our show. The theme and breaks music is variously by singer-songwriters Blake Morgan, Yanita, Melissa Geigas, and David Cloyd, all of them recording artists with ECR Music Group. I'm Robin Morgan. Thanks for being with us. Join us next week when Cecile Richards of Planned Parenthood will be here to help us look at how far we've come, or have we, on the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. And we'll look at where the Obama administration is going, or is it? Only here on Talk Radio with a Brain, Women's Media Center, live.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on 1580 gov.biz radio, a CBS station.